uh, Progressive Insanities of a Pioneer. The title of this poem is quite self explanatory. It deals with insanity. Insane. Sanity, sane means sense, rationality. Insane means not in senses. Madness, in other words. Though madness is not at all does not carry a pejorative connotation at all in the literary and intellectual discourse if you delve deep from Dryden to Foucault, uh, you know, uh, or in the Indian context, from Chaitanya Mahaprabhu to Ramakrishna, madness has been celebrated. Foucault actually did not celebrate madness directly, but he pointed it out that it used to be celebrated before the onslaught of rationalism created the mad as a category. Thankfully, we don't have to talk about Foucault much in understanding Margaret Atwood. So, insanity means madness, and not to be confused with insaniyat. Insan, insane, different things. Though insans can be insanes, in fact, insans are insanes and insanes are mostly insan. Though we have heard about dogs' insanity, when they have hydrophobia, etc., etc. But anyway, uh, that is not our point today. Now, this is part of our post colonial literature paper, but as you know, I've been trying to contribute a little bit to, you know, uh, all the students who are doing BM, etc., in English from other universities. So I have made it an open lecture, but basically, this is part of the post colonial literature course that I give in my institution. So I believe, like our leaders, especially our prime minister, and all other leaders, knowledge should be shared, more and more. I remember. Anyway, I'll come to that later. And another thing is that this poem is in a way doubly interesting because this is the only poem in our course and possibly one of the few poems in the entire quote unquote post colonial poetry which talks from the perspective of the colonizer, not the colonized. Generally, when we select texts for post colonial papers, we avoid the colonizer's viewpoint and then choose the colonized's viewpoint because that is the basic frame of post-colonial study. Okay? The empire strikes back. Now, anyway, writes back. Periphery strikes back. So many writing back, striking back, this etc. are there, you know. But I wanted this to remain because let's have the other viewpoint also because there is always beside and beyond. That's why Anya Lomba et al. Their second book is Post-Colonialism and Beyond. So, post-colonialism is there, it will be there, but then we need to include other voices too. So, anyway, this is an exercise in beyond. So, this poem talks about the tremendous mental anxiety that the first generation settlers faced in Canada because Canada, Australia, and New Zealand, again, I have told you earlier, these are the settler colonies. Unofficially, we also call them the white colonies. Unlike Africa, the Indian subcontinent, Trinidad, Tobago, etc. Anyway, but then the experience more or less would be same for the first generation in in all these countries to the extent that it is an alien setup that they are coming to. However, in Africa and Canada, Australia, and New Zealand, which were sparsely populated, unlike India, possibly the feeling of the pioneers, those who came for the first time to settle, was dreary, to say the least. So, Margaret Atwood assumes, you know, you know, okay, no, it's not, does not assume as such. I mean, tries to imagine how a settler, first generation settler or pioneer would have felt when he encountered this vast wilderness of Canada, and symbolically, as I said, it can be seen as symptomatic of all pioneers. So I will do some reading from the poem, but before that, the main theme of the poem is that the pioneer settler is experiencing more and more things which are increasingly hostile and alien to him because he's come from England, settled country, London, or whatever other places in England, Scotland. But then here he is encountering a wilderness which does not listen to him. He cannot domesticate the wilderness. He cannot subsume it within his scheme of things. I am using the gender he advisedly because she also uses it, but and then most of the pioneers first generation must have been men, because men are possibly more colonial than women. So but then this experience fades as generations go on. Second generation, third generation settlers will be more familiar with the place. Same is the case with, the diasporic community. The first generation diasporic is very hostile, estranged, exilic uh, condition he or she lives in. But as generations progress, the second or third generation, they merge more successfully into the hostland culture. Anyway, so the poem is like this. He stood at a point on a sheet of green paper. It starts like that. He stood on a point on a sheet of green paper. The pioneer is standing on the wilderness, and Atwood compares her to just a point, a speck of dust in a sheet of green paper, because greenery, all, and that means his existence is very insignificant. Proclaiming himself the center, though he stands as a point, but he thinks that point is the center. This is the colonizers or settlers' ego. I am monarch of all I survey, my right there is none to dispute. From Solitude of Alexander Selkirk, on which the story of Robinson Crusoe was based. Anyway, with no walls, no borders anywhere, the sky no height above him, totally unenclosed, and shouted, "Let me out." This is very important. No walls, no borders, because in the metropolis in England, Europe, there are walls, there are borders, mending walls, Frost's theme. He dug the soil in rows, imposed himself with shovels. He asserted into the furrows, "I am not random." He's using shovel, and all other instruments of digging, agriculture, etc., and trying to impose him on that wilderness. Because in wilderness you don't do agriculture. It is the civilizational pattern that he is bringing to the wild land. The ground replied with aphorisms, and a tree sprout, a nameless weed, words he could not understand. That means his attempts were successive failures. He tried to plant something, grow something, but weeds were coming, trees were coming, which he, did not know. I mean, it is advisable, though in these videos I generally do not talk about, the so much critical discourses, critical investments, but in this regard, it is still advisable for you to read Margaret Atwood's theory book, Survival, a thematic guide to Canadian literature, where you will find the reasons why topography, description of topography, geography, etc., are so very important for Canadian literature, and by implication other quote-unquote post-colonial literatures. I will not tell you why. Let it be a job for advanced or interested students. Anyway, he also builds a house, the house pitched, the plot staked in the middle of nowhere. At night, the mind inside, in the middle of nowhere. Vast vacuum all around the pioneer. So that means it's tremendous anxiety. It's come to an alien land. If you have read The Last of the Mohicans or Patrick White's Voss, The Journey Through the Desert, or any other novel discussing the wilderness, even Jungle Book. Of course, Jungle Book is the spirit is in that of a romantic adventure. You will be able to imagine, Robinson Crusoe. How a person from a settled culture, city, etc., would feel when he or she lands up in a total wilderness. There is, as I say, tremendous anxiety, psychological pressure, because he cannot familiarize or domesticate the environment that is out there. So that leads him to madness. That is why progressive insanity of a pioneer. It's a jungle. There are trees that you don't know, which fruits you would eat and not, you don't know. Animals are there, you don't know. Even if you knew, in your own country you had not lived in the jungle with animals. So I hope you are getting the point. So that is there. The idea of an animal patters across the roof in the darkness. The fields defend themselves with fence in vain. Everything is getting in. So he had, put fences around, but then in vain. Fences cannot defend. Everything is getting in. That is animal and all the things are getting in. Please do not take it literally. Try to see the metaphor also. That is, when the colonizer or the settler comes to new land, they want to establish barrier, of which these fences can be seen as symbolic. But then the dominated culture also pushes back. So here you can use some bhaba, hybridity. There is a contrapuntality between the colonizer and the colonized. Though prima facie it appears that the colonizer is only, dominating the colonized. So by daylight he resisted. He said, disgusted with the swarms clamoring and the outburst of rocks, this is not order, but the absence of order. So he said that this is not order, but absence of order. Order is related to, again, settled culture, metropolitan culture. But in the wilderness, in the colony, there is absence of order. So he was wrong, the answering forest replied. It was an ordered absence. So, absent order, ordered absence. Again, this reciprocity of these two tropes, order and absence, are also very important. For many years he fished for a great vision, dangling the hooks of sown roots under this, again fishing from the arboreal thing. The poet goes on to the aquatic domain. When the colonizer or the settler, I am using the colonizer to show you the relatedness, but the proper word here is pioneer, as has been used, but it includes the meaning of first generation colonizer, first generation settler, etc. So, but then again in the fishing too, it is the same. And finally, the poem gives the indication that he is swallowed by the vastness, by the wilderness of the Canadian prairie, Canadian forest or jungle, and the person or the pioneer who wanted to erect a structure of his existence, of his priority, succumbs to the demands of the new land. The green vision, the unnamed whale invaded, etc. In a way, the message is same. It has been said in so many metaphors and similes. Now, if I say everything line by line, then you won't read the poem. But I have given the keys and the leads, so please read the poem and try to bring out your own meaning, along with, as I said, if possible, a little bit of bhava, and then also for advanced and interested students, survival thematic guide to Canadian literature. After a long time, I have come because I was too busy with election duty. It has not ended. On 2nd May, again, I'll have to go for counting. Possibly before that, I'll do a couple of more things, more texts, etc., so that the loss that has occurred can be made up for. But till I come back, all the very best.